Hi there, my name is Andy Farquharson and I'm your host on Alternative Exit, the podcast dedicated to educating small business owners about the possibilities, benefits and challenges of transitioning to an employee ownership model. Did you know that there are over 200 million SMEs around the globe with an owner that will be retiring within the next 10 years? Many of these owners will never actually find a buyer for their business, forcing them to close their doors, wreaking havoc on their employees and the communities. There is an alternative. This show will explore different forms of employee ownership and the best practices for a successful transition. Each episode is going to feature interviews with experts on employee ownership, business owners who've successfully made the transition, and consultants who've helped facilitate these changes. Okay, now let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to the Alternative Exit. Today we are joined by John Guzek. So John is a researcher and practitioner specialising in employee ownership and organisational behaviour. Recently he has co-authored an article called Overcoming the Barriers to Employee Ownership, Insights from a Small and Medium Business. Now, that last element is the key here. The insights from the small and medium businesses is one of those areas that's often overlooked because ESOPs are actually they haven't penetrated that part of the market as well. So through his research, John has identified some of those key barriers like for SMB owners, such as lack of time, money and skills among those owners. So the research also sort of dives in and suggests there might be some alternative approaches that these SMB owners might be able to dig into. So super excited to dive into that in today's conversation. John, welcome to the Alternative Exit.
Thanks so much for having me, Andy. Thrilled to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So, mate, what initially inspired you to dive into this research in particular?
For sure. So some background quickly. I've been working in the employee ownership field now for the past 10 years. I started off in research, first on cooperatives, then turned over to employee stock ownership plans and ESOPs. And I remain involved both with some work for the city of New York and also some advisory services. And part of what you learn over time with every conference you go to, every conversation you have about employee ownership is, if it's so great, why isn't there more of it? If it's such a successful strategy, then where is it? Like, show me the proof, show me the money.
Yeah.
That's totally a fair question. And I think what's interesting is in the employee ownership world, there is a million and one answers as to what really it is about. And there's a number of different theories, people will propose solutions, but I wanted to research this question from the perspective of small business owners. So like thinking about it from a product market fit perspective, employee ownership, it's different instruments or products. And the market of small business owners, there's a reason they're not adopting this. And the question is really interviewing them to be able to understand why, rather than just thinking maybe it's capital or maybe it's this or that. So I wanted to hear from people directly.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, and I'm so excited to dive into this. I mean, I said that SMB perspective is something that's really, it's really dear to my heart. So like understanding more about sort of what you've uncovered is going to be super helpful. Now, talk a little bit more about, during this research, how did you go out and get their voice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So fortunately, from my past background, I have some connections to employee ownership people. So I want to be able to shout out, for example, the employee ownership centers. Anyone who's interested in employee ownership should reach out to one of them. Good people. They're based in most states. One of them that is particularly excellent is Colorado. Colorado has gone farther than so many states in advancing employee ownership. So they put me in touch with a number of people in their network. Also, New York City, having worked in small business services and agency there before, connected with a lot of different bars and restaurants and retail shops that are based throughout Brooklyn and Manhattan. And then a couple of other folks who were just based in Pennsylvania who I had known or that I saw online. I saw that they had launched employee ownership or they had done a profit sharing plan, and I reached out and did some cold calls and found people that way too.
All right. So there was most of the research done in the qualitative approach, like actually having interviews with these people?
Yeah, exactly. So it's purely qualitative. I should stress that. It was interviews with 30 small business owners. There was a list of questions that I asked them, but basically those questions were, one, just trying to understand their business and their workforce. What is their strategy for growth? What is their story? Then diving deep into, had they thought about employee ownership? And if they had, then ask them about what was that journey like? And if they hadn't done it, it's the question of why. Why didn't you do it? Why did you reject this idea? So I got a nice segmentation, basically, of some people who had done it, some people who had rejected it, some people who, right, had considered it and taken some kind of lighter form of it.
Why had people rejected it? Well, actually, I'd sort of break that out. Like, so they obviously they knew about it to reject it. Like, so of the people that you spoke to, were there many, firstly, that didn't even know about it?
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of people who simply don't know about it. I think especially among smaller business owners where you have an owner operator, and really what they are is more of an operator than an owner, right? They're more likely to be working the cash register than projecting cash flows. So those are a lot of people. And I would say what's interesting when you speak with them, you ask them about their workforce, their culture, they'll oftentimes say things that like restaurants, man, I wish that we could get people to invest more, into the company and invest into our success. And I'm like, you're saying exactly the words that are what employee ownership can do for you, but they're just
Yeah.
not aware. And they also just don't have the time for strategic planning for the reasons I just said. For the people who had considered and rejected it, there's like two reasons it comes down to. One is most commonly, one is it has to do really with time. They just don't have enough time, like I mentioned. They don't have enough scaled operation. They're just operating. The second one is money. Setting up an ESOP is very costly to do, heavy upfront expenses, annual valuations you have to pay for to be able to sustain it. This is not cheap. It's quite complex. And really, what that then requires is a mindset. That's the third barrier, I would say. A lot of people don't have the mindset because what you need to do is to say, I'm going to take on some really clear upfront costs and I'm going to have these hazy long-term gains. Maybe I get them, maybe I don't, right? And so you have to prioritize purpose over certainty of profit and returns. And only a certain segment of business owners, one, have the cash flows and the time to do that. And two, are really like, I'm going to prioritize the legacy, the culture of my company, the workforce. And if that means that I don't make as much money, I'm willing to be able to eat that. But a lot of people can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Like those three make a lot of sense. I mean, what was the most surprising thing that came out of the research?
I think the most surprising thing is the fact that there's a number of business owners who are trying another model, right, which we call shared ownership light, and we can dive into that.
Yeah.
But it's really the fact that this is what I'm going to say, that when you think about employee ownership, rather than just as an impact strategy, which it is, but we also think it about as an incentive solution, which it is also. It's also a way, right, of basically guaranteeing a reward, for example, equity or share of profits. And in turn, that's going to incentivize people to make different decisions. That's what really creates performance improvements. And so chatting with people, realizing that they wanted that team-based culture. They wanted to align incentives. And they had thought creatively in ways to do that without a full capital and legal restructuring of their business.
I think it'd be great to sort of break down a little bit more about sort of what you see as those key ingredients. I mean, you talked about like the importance of profit sharing. I mean, you talked about participatory management. I mean, what are the other sort of key ingredients that you see sort of make up employee ownership that can be deployed in this employee ownership light?
Yeah, for sure. So the other word that we have for it, we increasingly term it ownership OS, or like an ownership operating system. And the way I would describe this is like a holistic set of management practices that are aligning the drivers of what employees care about and what the business cares about. Oftentimes these things are misaligned, right? And that's what really creates inefficiencies and missed opportunities for value creation. But what these firms were doing differently is finding that alignment between the drivers of people in the company. And so that looks like three different things in practice. The one is, like we mentioned, profit sharing. So it's really about a distribution of earnings. And you can think about it like a waterfall, right? So after I'm going to make some amount of earnings, but then I'm going to need to save some of it to be able to make investments, save some for distributions. I'm going to need to pay maybe some debt and interest and things like that. But after I do those things, I'm going to have some residual earnings, and I can share a percentage of those with the employees to align everybody on the same outcome of maximizing the value, the performance of the business. The second thing is information. So again, it's about that, all about the waterfall. So it's thinking about, if we have this really high like goal, let's say for profits, how am I going to cascade that down to the employees to make it feel controllable for them? What are the things like, for example, wasting and breaking? Let's say fewer items in the restaurant that are going to save on costs that I have control over, but they're ultimately going to flow all the way downwards, right, to actually saving us. So it's about sharing that information about performance. And the third thing is about control and decision making. So it's also about delegating decision making downwards in a really intentional, structured way. I think the takeaway that I'm going to say here is a lot of businesses do some form of these three things. They pay people, they share some amount of information, they delegate some decisions, but it's not a structured approach. And that kind of structure of the cascade, the waterfall, that's what really creates this ownership OS and culture.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you're talking about, this seems like good business practices. Like, you talk about sort of the when you hear about the businesses are being run really well, like they've got all those elements that are included. I mean, in the research that you did, which one of those between profit sharing, information, and control, which ones of those did you find that was, I guess, the toughest thing for their owners to do, both emotionally and also technically?
I'll say like two things. So the one is, what is the easiest thing to do? Fortunately, the easiest thing to do is just to share information with employees. Even if you're not profitable, this is something you can do. And information really is a source of value for a lot of employees to understand what is their role within the larger business. And you can do that intentionally. Don't need to be profitable. You don't need to create a complicated governance structure. The hardest thing to do.
What type
Yeah.
of information, though?
Yeah. So, like, to put it in an example, so one of the businesses I spoke with, right, is this restaurant based in Michigan. They have a few hundred employees. They scaled pretty well. The reason is because of this ownership OS that they built. And what they do is that, like, they do the strategic planning process like any other company. Like right now it's November. A lot of people are saying, here's our revenue and our EBITDA targets and so on. But then what they'll do is actually then they'll have the KPIs on one hand, like EBITDA and gross margin, and they'll have the org chart on the other. And they'll say, all right, how do we link these two things? Who has the most control over each one of these line items? And how am I going to flow it down all the way to the front line? And so that's what they did. They said, okay, at our restaurants especially, we have servers and cooks. They have a lot of control over wastage and breakage. This is something actually that we can say to them. These are really real things you can do to save on costs. And then once a month, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you, here's how we're performing in terms of earnings. This is how you contributed to it. You saved a lot of costs. Great job, everybody. Look how you contributed to our earnings. And now that our earnings are higher, look what the percentage profit you're going to get paid out. What's in it for you? Real money. So connecting those dots is really, really valuable.
Yeah, I love bringing those together. As I said, it does seem like the easiest one. I mean, talk me through about how do they best align control? Because that for me is a really, I mean, it's a really emotional one for a lot of these people. It's their business is their baby for a long time.
100%. Yeah. So this is the hardest one to do, without question, emotionally and technically, to your question. So, there's what I would say is like what you see in a lot of businesses that I've interviewed and worked with. There's one or two things that are happening with control. The one is a lot of the decisions are contained at the top. And so as a result, employees really are left to be able to operate within the strict confines of their jobs that are clear job descriptions. The other case that I see is that there's no job descriptions. No one really knows. It's a lot of informality to the business. People love that. They're growing quick. They're making things happen. But the trade-off is that basically whatever the decisions are just flowing down kind of haphazardly. Sometimes it's like you're left with a residual decision that's not that meaningful or powerful, or you have decisions flowing down inordinately to certain people and they're overwhelmed by it. There's just not enough structure. And so what it looks like is this, like I'll give an example. One is being asked to inform decisions, like asking employees to inform business decisions that make a difference to their lives. So I'll give an example. There's a business that I worked with where the employees, their point of feedback was, we want better bathrooms. This is actually shockingly a common request. A lot of employees, these manufacturing wholesale, like their break rooms, their facilities are not great and they want better. That's fair. So then they interviewed the employees and said, okay, that's fair. You guys want these better bathrooms. Let's lay out some simple math in front of you. This is how much it's going to cost. It's going to cut into our earnings. It's going to cut into your profit share. You can make this decision. We can make this investment, but it's going to cost us. Is it worth it? And the employees were like, oh, yeah, now that I see those numbers, maybe not so much. So they didn't do it. They actually went back. They gave them control over the decision. And instead, the employees figured out with the management, what we're going to do is we're going to repurpose the bathrooms that we have. We're going to make them gender neutral. That was actually the solution. It's a lot of men all going to the men's bathroom. They make them both gender neutral. It solved the bathroom line problem. And it's so simple, but it actually, like, immediately you see engagement scores go up. So part of this has to do with not just that people can get into the bathroom faster, clearly. This has to do with the fact that people had choice. They had a decision. They had actually agency over something that was bigger than their role that improved their quality of life. These things are valuable. So that's just one example. There's a couple other I'm happy to share.
No, I love that. Like it just, yeah, a really sort of clear way of, I guess, aligning the decision making. Because I think that's you highlighted one of the biggest fears that I think that most people have. Like the employers are just going to come in and want to make decisions that aren't based on any business reality. And talking people through like the education of this is what the decision means. I think is an amazing step. What are some other examples that you've got of organizations of having to sort of make those decisions around sort of span of control?
Yeah, for sure. So the other part of it is, right, so there's like two angles to it. The first part I talked through was there's business decisions and people can inform them. They know they have to spend some amount of cash to make some capital improvements. What do we do with it? The other way to do it is to say, employees, you have great ideas. There's latent potential and there's latent ideas from the bottom where you see inefficiencies that we as management are missing. And we're not going to sit on these. So a lot of employers, what they'll do is they say that they do this, right? They'll survey employees, they'll chat with them, but what you see is a lot of times they don't respond to the ideas. So they'll survey everybody, they'll get some great survey scores. They'll be like, these are cool ideas. We don't have the time or money for them, but thank you everybody. We hear you. And then they move on. That's like shockingly common. The other way to do it is an example is like once you start to share information with employees, they start to get better. There's one company I spoke with, and at that company, it was a manufacturing company. They produced some type of widget. I won't go into too many details, but in their process, they were sourcing and manufacturing one of these parts it was pretty costly. It's a costly part in kind of the assembly line. And one of the employees said, I think we could 3D print this. And if we were to 3D print this, I think that this would save a ton of money because I know how 3D printing works and it costs like a tenth the price of whatever we're taking for the traditional way. So they had the ownership culture in place, ran a structure for the employee to voice this idea. The management also had the culture of responding to the idea and saying, that's pretty good. So we're going to actually give you the agency and the resources and the time to pursue this. Go out and find out about 3D printing. We don't know anything about it, but I'm curious. So he figured it out and he ended up saving, I think, like on that, like multiple like basis points of margin. He really saved the company serious money. They actually institutionalized 3D printing for this part of the operation. And they ended up saving like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So cool. These are the kind of examples of like an ownership OS in practice. Yeah.
It's a great story. I love how sort of you emphasize the fact that you need to close that loop on that feedback too. It's having a culture of employees raising their hands and identifying those issues, like opportunities, doesn't mean anything if the management isn't doing that either. I love the idea of sort of turning your employees into an innovation engine, like doing that. What are some of the ways like that you've seen that technically happen? Because you can see a lot of the fears of these sort of owners, but look, I still want the employees to focus on their job rather than trying to come up with ideas to sort of to happen all over the place. Yeah. So how do some people actually bring that to life?
So one thing I'd stress is it's not like a radical disruption. I think when a lot of people you tell them like, oh, let's open the books a bit more. Let's give employees a bit more control. I get it. The first reaction is to be like, they're all going to come knocking down my door. I'm going to have like hordes of people who expect all these things. But it's really simple practices. So like one of these examples is doing, monthly, quarterly town halls with the entire company where I'm going to lay out what our performance is. I'm going to tell you, quite honestly, this is what the survey scores tell us. I'm not going to misrepresent them. I'm actually going to put quotes on the board from real employees that I heard from so that people feel heard and seen. And I'm going to give responses to like the really interesting input that employees gave. And I'm also going to bring people up onto the stage that are not the CEO and they're not the C-suite. I'm going to bring on frontline managers, frontline employees to be able to speak to certain items so that we're really, truly sharing ownership of the meeting. And that implies that we're sharing ownership, really, of taking accountability for the company, taking accountability for costs and revenue and all these things. The other thing is just like setting it. So people already do town halls, just restructure them, make them more participatory and responsive. The second thing is, running, for example, just ideation sessions and huddles with employees. So the issue, right, is for a lot of companies, you have like 100, 1,000, 10,000 employees at the company. The town hall is never going to be a 10,000 people giving input. This is impossible. What I can do, right, is that I can delegate kind of downwards to my regional leads. I can delegate downward to really my people leaders and able to hold small meetings on an ongoing basis that are not simply about just executing on a task. Everything is so operational. I get it. But there's also strategic conversations we have on a monthly or quarterly basis where we're saying, let's actually reflect on what we're doing on a performance. We talked about wastage and breakage, for example, for our team. What does that actually mean? What does that look like? What kind of ideas have you come up with that you've heard? And then that manager's gonna gather that input and relay it upwards back to the C-suite. So it's really just about repurposing existing meetings in some way and adding a couple here or there and just structuring them very intentionally for just a true dialogue.
Nice. Awesome. So those three elements that you talked about, seems like they're the basis of shared ownership light. Is that right? I mean, how does that vary from an ESOP?
Yeah, it's a great question. So with ESOPs, the interesting thing when you chat with a lot of ESOP business owners is they really focus on the capital and legal restructuring the business. So they focus on the technicals, not as much on the operations up front. And this makes sense because the reason that they did it was they want to prioritize preserving the legacy of the company. And then in some cases, in many cases, but not all, you'll see the business say, if we're sharing ownership, then we probably should share more data with the employees. This makes sense. So they get the information component. The third thing is they'll say we should probably give more control, or we should make sure that employees have input. If we're calling them owners, they should have some kind of input in the process, even if they don't have voting rights, which in 99% of ESOP cases, they do not, to be clear. And so they adopt these kind of practices piecemeal. That's what you see. And in some cases, they do an exceptional job. Like there's some ESOPs where you see that they'll set up employee committees that are focused around like how we sharing information. So they'll be focused on learning and development. They'll be focused on how do we take ideas. So they'll do all of that in a really committee-based way, which is brilliant. But in a lot of other cases, you'll speak with them and you'll ask them, how do you share data with employees? How do you do this information component? And they'll say one of two things. They'll say, one, I share data every single week with my employees. I give them 20 PowerPoint slides in long like Excel files so they can see it all. And I'm like, how many responses do you get to that? They're like, not many, but I'm doing it. I'm sharing the data. And I'm like, okay, that's good, but maybe not so readable. The second thing is they'll say, we have an annual town hall. I'll share the performance of the company at the annual town hall once a year. And that's pretty good. People are getting a look into the books. But again, once a year, we're not sharing enough information enough regularly for people to react.
Frequency just isn't there, is it? Yeah, people can't act on that.
It's not there. So there are ESOPs that do this exceptionally well. There's ones that do it not as well. It's a spectrum like anything else. But what's funny is that there's people who aren't ESOPs who are doing it better than the ESOP community is. And the ESOP community could learn from some of these business owners.
Yeah. So when you think about the advantages of doing this, I mean, it's sort of the owner OS or the shared ownership light. It's more of just having more rigor around ensuring that, hey, you've got those those last two elements. I mean, there isn't a profit share element of ESOPs, is there?
There can be. So one thing I will say is a lot of ESOPs, especially those that I interviewed, pair the ESOP with profit sharing. The reason is the two blend beautifully, right? It's just like we're sharing two forms of value. We're sharing equity value and we're sharing a percentage of profits. The two are linked. One of them is short term, one of them is long term. So it does happen, but it is not a guarantee, not every case.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of sort of implementing something like this, like you talk about, because what you're talking about there is some like decent cultural changes, like having these employees start thinking a little bit differently, and obviously managers thinking a lot differently in terms of and owners thinking a lot differently. How long does a transition take towards a shared ownership light style model?
Yeah, so the journey usually looks like, I think you can think about it from like a company journey perspective, right? In the early days, we're going to launch the business. It's going to be everything is on the owner. They're going to have no extra time to be able to do any extra things. You don't even have job descriptions in the early days. And the culture is really founder centric. It has to be. There's not enough time. Then we're going to grow it over time. And hopefully we're going to hit this inflection point where we become profitable. We have enough profit to be able to actually share with employees. we have enough employees and enough scaled operation where we begin to be able to distribute and delegate accountability and responsibility. And really, we have enough just team members that there's real value to aligning the team because we're starting to grow to a level that's not there. So the way that it really works is I think that once you hit that threshold of profitable enough, you're scaled enough that we're able to have the business owner as time, then at that point, what we'll usually see is the business owner will start sharing more information, hopefully in this intentional way. They'll begin to share profit, but again, in a really intentional way as well. That requires, right, a lot of financial projections and workforce projections to do correctly. And so it really, the bottom line here is it begins with like foundational human capital management practices in many ways, like
Yeah.
just developing job descriptions, professionalizing the business. And then over time, we're just going to level up. We're going to level up those foundational practices to a place where we're building ownership culture.
So it sounds like obviously the key barrier is just, availability of the owner, the amount of time that they've got and potentially capital to support them through that journey. So yeah, is that something that is that true? Like time's one of the biggest barriers?
Yeah, I would argue yes. If there's one thing I learned from working with small businesses for a long time, it's that they just don't have the time to be able to come out actually to workshops. Like, for example, we offer in the employee ownership community so many workshops,
Yeah.
intro to ESOPs, intro to co-ops. These are brilliant workshops, but I know from having tried to be able to organize these workshops that the people who come out to them are people who don't own a business yet because they have time. People who own a business, they will always look at what they have to do next, like working the cash register, and they won't necessarily come out. So question becomes like, how do you reach these business owners, right? If the value proposition is there, we have the case studies, we have the data. How do we reach them? And in my mind, it's like a huge piece of the puzzle is reaching these intermediaries that work with these business owners. They have accountants, they have some kind of lawyer, they have fractional people, right, who serve, let's say, as kind of a CHRO or CFO for them. These people, right, are professionals who connect with all these people. And so I think that you can reach those professionals, and especially I think through like the infrastructure the employee ownership community already has. We already have a lot of employee ownership centers. We have a number of different ESOP service providers, and these people work with those professionals. But a lot
Mhm.
of times, the only tune they're singing is ESOPs, or the only tune the co-op people are singing is co-ops. And the truth is, in my mind, is that like ownership OS, like we're describing, this is a pathway for a lot of businesses to eventually sell their business because we're doing two things. We're helping them to grow and succeed, and we're proving the value, right, of actually sharing this information, these profits, and so on. And so you convince them, you compel them. And I chat with business owners who said, I did all these practices. I think I might sell my business now to my employees. This makes sense. Like I get it. I get why this works.
Yeah.
So it's a pathway to help all of us.
Yeah, look, it's you see about like there's organizations like the Exit Planning Institute, et cetera, and they talk a lot about implementing a lot of these tactics, like that you've talked about, those elements to drive performance. So you've actually got a more valuable asset to be able to sell. I think the big say that's and obviously educating them to do it in a more inclusive way opens up their opportunity to employee ownership. But the one thing that they talk about a lot is that to have a meaningful impact on those sort of less tangible metrics, like those employee engagements and improve sort of productivity over time, is the time it takes for a lot of these people, like because like people, the time and energy, right? Because it does take a lot of energy to implement these things. I mean, what do you see as the type of turnaround time to be having a really impact on the organization in terms of like the employee satisfaction and engagement?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll say two different things to your point about like the time required and who is the audience for this? Who is the time? It's like one additional point is I've been struck by the number of companies where if they're doing M&A, right, they're either acquiring a new business, it's a private equity investor that just invested, it's a search fund. It's one of those things where it's just like a new business is bought and there's an opportunity for transformation and there's an urgent need for it. Those kinds of folks are more open basically to shared ownership strategies because ownership is already on their minds. The cap table is already on their minds and they want to be able to produce outsized returns. So it's like that segment, which isn't huge, I think that's actually a good beachhead to be able to build ownership like OS and to build employee ownership more broadly. That's the reason you see a lot of like private equity getting involved right now, like we both know with KKR and Blackstone and so on.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point though, like so that you're raising. Like it's we definitely see it doesn't seem like it's really broad based. Like you look at sort of what the search fund models and like even sort of some of the PE, like some of these they've got that opportunity to exit. Like do you see it as sort of protecting those jobs long term, or giving people just a really good opportunity to get some liquidity and increase the amount of sort of money that they can take home within that sort of 5 to 7 year hold period?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the number one questions that I've gotten in the private equity space is when we sell the company, are the employees going to still be there? Like, like they're all going to get a big payout. And then there's two questions. One, is everyone going to get fired because a new PE firm or new investors come in? Or two, are all the employees going to leave because they just got a big payout and now they're good?
Yeah.
They're going to head out to the golf course. And neither one has proven out to be true. Like it's an extremely valid concern I had of myself, but I just don't see it happen. And I would attribute that to one, that these employees are not getting paid out such huge sums that they're able to just retire and call it quits. Two is really that the power of the company, why it's become more attractive, is its culture. That has become a differentiator. And we hear that from different investors. That's part of the reason the buyer bought it, is because of how strong that is, and that translates in performance. So they don't really have a reason to disrupt that. They might change. What we've seen is that the new buyer, let's say, will come in and they will change the terms of the plan. They'll set up a new broad-based shared ownership plan, but they won't get rid of it. And the reason is because it built the company to the value it has. And they also, in turn, generally won't fire the employees right afterwards. The second point I'll make that's related to this quick is that oftentimes what you see is with a really good ownership culture, you're going to see some selection effects. And what I mean by that is that the really good employees who love information and they love to be kind of like their own change agents, those people will step up. The employees that are not performing as well, their teammates are going to look around and say, I'm sharing my profits with you. You're not even doing your part. So it actually promotes a high performance culture where it weeds out the people that are not as committed and competitive. On one hand, that's tough for them. On the other hand, like that's how you build a great business. You're attracting really the high performers, and that's what we see. So as a result, we see these things sustain like overwhelmingly so.
Okay. So which brings me just to a point, going back to sort of the research that you did, like how many of those 30 businesses do you think have a really good understanding of their company culture?
It's fascinating speaking with ESOP business owners, the one that I have at least. And you'll ask them, what do your engagement scores look like? Do you know what your turnover number is? Like these are two of the core metrics that are very objective. We can measure these regularly. And I'll ask them and they don't know. They don't know the answer. You'll ask them, how much does it cost to actually sustain your ESOP year over year, to run the valuation? You're talking about educating employees. What are the expenses on that? They won't be able to cite the number. So it's fascinating. It's not really so much of like an ROI perspective that they have with really their employee stock ownership plan. And so it's the kind of thing where if you do measure those, though, I will just say that in the best ones that you are seeing engagement scores go up, turnover rates go down if you build a kind of ownership culture. So it certainly can be done.
Okay, so the key is like those engagement scores, and like on a quarterly survey. Is that what you see as best practice for those?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, best practice is run an ENPS, right? Score employee NPS, run an employee engagement or satisfaction survey. Run that, I would say, once a quarter. The thing is, you need some kind of pulse survey, however you want to do it, that you're able to report out to the employees, not once a year, but more regularly, how people are doing. Because that's going to be a leading indicator for you of when things are going right or they're going wrong. It'll be a leading indicator to either we're going to see performance improvements down the road because people are engaged, or if they're not, we're going to start to probably see higher turnover. So we're able to course correct and actually predict by measuring that regularly and reporting it.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so John, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to learn more about the research and obviously that wealth of knowledge that you come about sort of employee ownership. Now, Before we go, I'd like to ask you a fast round of questions where I'm just going to hit you up with 3 questions and you offer a quick response. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Let's do it.
Okay. All right. So who is the leader that you most admire in employee ownership?
Oh, I would say Joseph Blasi. Joseph Blasi is the former head of the Rutgers Institute for Study of Employee Ownership. He is like one of the founding fathers. He has been a longtime mentor and advisor to me. He's incredible. Highly recommend everyone reach out to him.
Okay. You're not the first person to mention Joseph Blasi. What would be your favorite resource on employee ownership?
Yeah, I would say the National Center for Employee Ownership has a wealth of resources. It's incredible. So I recently read through my paper. I was like, where did I make all my citations from? Most of my citations, more than any other, came from NCEO.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. It's just incredible. Like, I think I know you've interviewed Corey Rosen. What Corey Rosen has done and Lauren Rogers is exceptional. They put together a combination of the research that proves that it works, of practitioners that have done it, of case studies, of examples and templates. It's really a wealth. Highly recommend that people go through their library.
Okay, awesome. And then finally, what would you say to a business owner who's sitting on the fence regarding a transition to employee ownership?
What I would say is that while the upfront expense and time is real, and I'm going to put that up front because that is very honest, and a lot of people do not, I think, say that directly. If you do it right, that the rewards that you're going to see for your legacy of the powerful culture that you'll build, I think for the employees in terms of the wealth that they'll build, and a time really in this economy where a lot of those kind of frontline employees are not building a lot of wealth, it can be exceptional. And that you also could be part, in my mind, I'm the evangelist. You could be part of really what I see as a shared ownership economy that we are moving to. There's a reason that there's articles coming about employee ownership in Wall Street Journal and 60 Minutes on TED Talks. There is something happening here. And this is an opportunity to differentiate your business in terms of its culture, its compensation strategy, and that ultimately becomes a winning business strategy.
Awesome. A great message. John, where can people follow you if they'd like to learn more about Shared Ownership Light or more research that you've got coming out?
For sure. So follow me on LinkedIn. If you search my name, John Guzek, there's not many of us.
You'll have a link.
Sure, a name and feel free to post it. Yeah. But I post semi-regularly research articles, things that I'm doing. So I always love to share.
Nice. Well, John, thank you so much for coming on, for going through doing this amazing research, and also for sharing on this podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me, Andy. It was a pleasure.
Cheers.
Cheers.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to continue learning about employee ownership as an alternative exit, head across to abettermonday.me for additional links and resources. You can also make sure to subscribe or follow along in your favorite podcast app, and be sure to leave us a 5-star review.